While the hurricane threat each year is greatest along the coast, we need to be just as prepared for the inland threat. Storm Team 7 meteorologist Dan Bickford explains.
You better be watching. You better be watching in the dark.
We see these scenes every year. Wind and surf on the coast as tropical storms and hurricanes strike. There are also scenes you see afterward, damage done inland. Hurricane experts say this is what we really need to pay attention to.
Don't focus on the details of the storm, like what the peak winds are, or the exact track, and remember that the hazards from the storm, especially inland rainfall and flooding, can extend hundreds of miles from the center of the storm and hundreds of miles inland from where the storm makes landfall.
Just last year, Hurricane Florence caused flooding in the Carolinas that lasted for weeks. Longer ago, but much closer to home, Tropical Storm Jerry brought well over a foot of rain to the upstate in late August of 1995. The #1 cause of hurricane fatalities away from the coast is flooding.
One thing we've seen the last few years is unfortunately a very high number of people that have died in vehicles in floods over the last 3 hurricane seasons. It's really unacceptable. We need to really stop when we see flooded roadways, turn around, don't risk your life to get to an event.
Flooding is just one of the inland hazards we face. Tornadoes and strong straight-line winds can occur with any storm, even well after landfall. However, you won't typically see inland evacuations before a storm. Hurricane evacuations are done only for storm surge along the coast. If you live in an area that typically floods or sees mudslides, or you're in a mobile home in the path of high winds or a tornado, it's a good idea to stay with a friend or family member until the threat is past. You should also have an emergency kit on hand in case of power loss or if you get cut off by flooding. Such things as batteries and a week's worth of non-perishable food, water, and medicine for each person in your house. Good to have in there. It can make a difference.
People need to realize you have to prepare for what could happen. And if you look at history, Hugo, you look at other events with Michael and Florence, it absolutely can happen inland. So prepare for what could happen. That's how you can save your life.
Meteorologist Dan Bickford, 7 News.
Stay on top of the latest in the tropics by clicking on Hurricane Center in the Weather tab at WSPA.com. Also, download the 7 News app to get the latest weather warnings for where you live. Tomorrow, we'll have a look at hurricane hunters who fly into these storms.
Thank you, Malachi. Hurricane season, of course, is here, and that means the crews will again be flying those research planes right into the storms that develop. Storm Team 7 meteorologist Dan Bickford tells us why that is important in watching our inland threat.
So I could see the lightning out the side window, but I couldn't see out the front. And so we finally made it through a very bumpy eye wall, burst out into the eye, and the first words of the pilot over the intercom were wholly not repeatable for television. So you could stick your head up against the side of the aircraft windows and look up, and there's just this hole in the sky with stars and a full moon shining down at you. And it just struck me that this is just such an incredibly beautiful sight that few people in the world will ever get to experience.
It's not your normal plane ride. Hurricane Hunter missions on these WC-130J aircraft last 10 to 12 hours, 6 of those in and around a storm. Their paths crisscross the storm's center 3 or 4 times, punching through the high winds.
We do the opposite of general aviation. We turn and go toward the storm instead of turn away from it. Over the years, we've developed good techniques in risk mitigation techniques, radars improved, things like that. So we kind of learned how to hit the soft spots in the storm.
Even so, the ride can get a little rough.
It was the landfall mission of Hurricane Ike in 2008 when it was hitting South Texas. And what I remember most about it is that's the time that I knew Ike was flying the airplane and I was not flying the airplane. And it probably only lasted 20 or 30 seconds, but it felt like an hour, and I'll never forget that.
Why is doing this so important? Getting the exact location of the center of the storm and getting weather information from inside the storm lead to more accurate forecasts.
The data we collect can't be collected any other way. People will often ask, well, don't you have satellites, this, that, the other thing? Why are we still sending men and women into storms? Well, satellite picture is great. It's like an X-ray. But sometimes you need that exact information in the center, like a biopsy. And these aircraft are our biopsy tools.
This makes a huge difference in letting people know when they need to prepare.
And last night, around 11:30, I came out here and the water had just covered this bottom step.
Please pay attention to those watches and warnings, and if the emergency managers say you need to take action, whether it's getting out from storm surge along the coast or worrying about river flooding here in inland areas, or high winds, if you have to worry about trees falling, and prepare for, be prepared going into the season and take action when you're advised to take action.
Meteorologist Dan Bickford, 7 News.
Now remember, you can stay on top of the latest during the hurricane season by clicking on the Hurricane Center in the Weather tab on our website, WSPA.com. You can also download the 7 News app to get the very latest weather warnings where you live. And tomorrow we're going to look at some ways to protect your property before the storms threaten. Tonight we're wrapping up our look at the inland threat of hurricane season with a look at protecting your house.
Here's Storm Team 7 meteorologist Dan Bickford. Hurricanes and tropical storms can bring flooding and high wind well inland. Your top priority is to protect yourself and your family, but how can you protect your property? Leslie Chapman Henderson is the president of FLASH, the Federal Alliance for Safe Homes, and an expert on what we can do to protect our homes. Start by watching the water.
Understand where the water goes when you have a lot of rain at your house. Keep your gutters clean. Look at that flow. If the water is flowing toward your house, that means it's going to rise up and eventually come in. Let's get a strategy for keeping it out of your house.
The only thing you can do is just try to save your personal property.
Those strategies include long-term projects like grading your property to keep water from flowing in, or short-term solutions like sandbags or other barriers. You also want to protect yourself in case water gets in.
The financial protection is flood insurance, and flood insurance has a 30-day waiting period, and it also is not included in your homeowner's policies.
This is critical to recovery. When Hurricane Harvey flooded Houston, Texas in 2017, the average payout for flood victims who did not have flood insurance was $3,400, not nearly enough to cover typical damage. Inland flooding is our main threat, but strong winds and isolated tornadoes can occur. You may want to keep trees trimmed away from the house to minimize damage, but that may be the least of your worries.
The other thing about tropical events when it comes to your house is you got to keep your roof on.
Start by checking your attic.
Look around the edges with a flashlight and say, okay, do I see metal connectors on the inside of the attic that are holding that roof down? If you don't see any, you can retrofit.
Letting wind get into a house can cause a roof to lift. Your house's weak spot might be right at the end of your driveway.
You should probably look at your garage door, because garage doors are large, weak openings, and they can be reinforced very affordably as well. And in most cases, when we go out after storms, garage doors are the first thing to go in a wind event.
You may never need that extra protection, but if you need it and don't have it, it will end up costing you much more. Meteorologist Dan Bickford, 7 News.
You can find reinforcement brackets for your roofs and garage doors in-store or online at a normal home improvement store. Depending on your situation, you may need a contractor to do the work. As we go through hurricane season, of course, stay on top of the latest by clicking on the Hurricane Center in the Weather tab of WSPA.com. Download the 7 News app. We've always got those weather warnings the minute they are issued.